captured the essence of that very well. And of course it is there right in the original statements which we made, but it's so easy, as you know, to get sidetracked or just to get very busy with day-to-day stuff and forget what you're really on about. So I think that message we need to almost keep reminding ourselves and even and saying almost like a mantra. And perhaps my question is, how do we get that message to those who do in fact have real power over resources like the federal governments and possibly state governments, when we know we have friends, we know we have people we've dealt with, and we know we have people who support us, but of course they're very few and far between, and I don't think Penny Wong is preaching your message just at the moment. So the question is, how do we get that message through to those key decision makers, those people who hold the real power?
I don't know whether to say this or not, but it's easy to get money. It's easy to get money off people if you show them starving kids and you show all that sort of stuff. But we don't want that sort of money. We want the sort of money that's coming with the person who has an understanding about and beginning to understand or willing to be open to understand self-determination. That these people will themselves make the change. You have a role, yes, you have a role in working alongside of them and being with them and so on, but your role is to be there and to enable and assist and to be in the background and not to take over. And that's very, very difficult for Western trained people like us who always want to control. It's a long struggle, but I think, Richard, people like yourself and others who have been involved in this all the time, I think it's on us to keep reminding ourselves and the other people in the group what this is about. I want to connect First Nations people of this country with the work that you're doing, that Friends of Aileu are doing in East Timor. You've been working with the people of East Timor as they reclaim their country, determine their own future. They'd had, as Richard has said, 400 years of benign, I guess you call it dictatorship from the Portuguese, and then 25 years of brutal, control by the Indonesian military. With your help, the Friends of Aileu are now exercising their right to have a voice on matters that impact on their lives. That's what the friendship is about. And so it is that the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people are wanting also to have a voice, to enable them to have a voice after some 250 years of largely being ignored. And I think there's a connection there. There's a lot more that could be said. There's also a second connection, and that is that the East Timor vote for independence was largely brought about by the action of the Timorese community themselves, with the support and help of communities right around the world, including here in Australia. And the basis of the relationship in Australia, of course, went back to World War II, when the soldiers, the diggers, the Australian soldiers in East Timor built very close relationships with the people of East Timor. And despite the efforts of governments like Indonesia, Australia, Portugal, the US, despite their efforts, the grassroots movements within East Timor and around the world were successful, helped and worked with the people of East Timor to be successful in gaining their independence. And I don't think we can ever understand how powerful that was during particularly that 25 years, the power of the community there and the community here and the communities around the world that gave support. That's very similar to what you are doing and the Friends of SWI and the other friendship groups are doing now, not in a time like it was back then. What I'd like to just speak very briefly about three things. One, I believe your friendship has been lasting because it's not about welfare, it's not about charity, it's not about aid, it's about development. Secondly, I believe that what you are doing is fundamental to this nation's, the whole nation's, national security in the long term. And the third thing I want to say, talk a little bit about, is that basic to democracy, to a democratic society, is self-determination and community engagement. To go back to the friendship long-lasting, because it's about development. Although, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you have not done a lot of work in giving assistance to the people of Aileu, East Timor, but that's not the thing that really makes your friendship so important. Your original document states that the people of Moreland, Merribeck and Hume and the people of Aileu agree to enter into a friendship to assist the rebuilding of Aileu and the restoration of local democracy. The friendship between Merribeck and Hume and Aileu is based on respect for local decision-making and local autonomy. So to do that, that requires the engagement of your own community, which you've done, in a process of mutual learning and understanding of another culture and a way of life. It requires a long-term commitment and it requires a partnership built on respect and understanding, which is very different to welfare and aid. It's about relationship building. It's about working with people who are seeking self-determination. It's not about doing things for people. It's not about doing things to people. It's about doing things with people. And that's what I call development. But it's not very widely understood because today, whenever you see the word overseas aid, you see overseas aid and development, as if they're the one and the same thing. They're not. They're quite different. It's not to say that development may not encompass some assistance and aid, but aid by its very self is not necessarily developmental. In fact, it's quite often the opposite. The second thing I wanted to say is that, and this is something that will be less understood than even the development aid one, and that is that what you're doing, in my view, is fundamental to this nation's long-term national security. There's one area that is always, in my opinion, being neglected, and that's the long-term relationship building between people to people and communities to communities. Now, you hear a lot of ministers in government talk and use that sort of language. In fact, I'm old enough now to have watched ministers absorb the NGO-type language, the community-based organisations language, and the big mistake that a lot of us in this field make is we continue to use the language instead of changing it. We've got to learn how to change our language to say what we really mean and not allow others to interpret it. Our national security is tied to the security of all the people in this region of the world where we live. Therefore, it's important that we, the people of this country, know those people and understand those people and respect those people. Today, unfortunately, with all due respects to most of the organisations, the aid and development organisations, most of them now rely very, very much on being suppliers of government programs. They're not suppliers of community-initiated programs. And that's a tragedy for me. That's a step backwards. That's happened in my lifetime. I can just about pinpoint where it started in Australia, but it's happened right around the world. The previous Prime Minister talked about the quiet Australians. And I tried to write an article, which I didn't get very far with it, but I tried to write an article saying that, of course, he knows all about the quiet Australians because he's worked very, very hard along with his government and other governments to quieten us Australians, to keep us quiet. No longer do you see very few organisations that receive government funding nowadays in these programs, which are government programs. Of course, written into the contract is that they can't speak, they can't say anything without the government's approval, which means that the whole idea of advocacy, the whole idea of people-to-people relationships, where you can actually go and you can advocate on behalf of a community, you're not allowed to do. And we've seen many of those sorts of things happen in recent years. Your friendship is different, and I think can be a model for the future in which communities at the local government level take the initiative to work with communities in our neighbouring countries. I suppose I'm trying to project a vision that this sort of friendship arrangement that we have, you have, and a number of local government areas and community groups have with East Timor could be replicated in Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Indonesia, and I could go on. And we would be a better country if that happened. We would understand one another a lot more, and our governments would be much more under the hammer for the way they build their relationships. The third thing is to talk about basic to democratic society as self-determination and community engagement. I think I spent 20 years with an organisation called Community First Development, which is an Indigenous organisation now. It wasn't in the beginning. But the one thing that I learnt, and I learned a lot of things during that time, working with First Nations people, they understand that better than anybody. They understand what self-determination is, and they understand what community engagement is, and they understand what community is. And in most cases, we've lost most of that in our society. So we've got a lot to learn from those people. And that also goes for Timor and Papua New Guinea and other countries like that. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.